All right, my name is Janelle Kerr. I am the Director of Minerals Geoscience at the Geological Survey of Queensland, and I hope you're aware that you've joined one of our series of SMI GSQ webinars that we've been running for quite a number of years. This is the latest installment. I'm really excited to hear our wonderful speakers today. But before I get into the webinar, I'd like to pause and take a moment to acknowledge that we are joining you today from Meanjin, the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people here in Brisbane. And I'd like to acknowledge the ongoing contribution that our traditional owners make to our culture, our society, and our knowledge, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd also extend that respect to any First Nations people joining us on this call today. A little bit of housekeeping before we kick off. You're more than welcome to ask a question anytime during the webinar. There's a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen where people will be able to type in questions. We also have the chat. If you've got any trouble asking a question through the Q&A function, feel free to jump in the chat and we should be able to help you out. As I mentioned, this is part of a series. We run our webinars on the final Thursday of the month. So the next one will be in April, but it won't be on a Thursday. We're breaking with tradition because a public holiday is the final Thursday of next month. So we'll be on the Wednesday, but usually final Thursday of the month, that's where you'll find us. So today's webinar is about two quite large topics, and we've got 5 wonderful speakers to cover off on that. So we've got circular economy and we've got ESG, and these terms are kind of bandied about sometimes in the same breath. A lot of us, I would suggest, maybe don't have a lot of interaction with what that actually means, what that looks like. So we've got a combination of government, researcher and company here today to give us their views on what these topics are, to give us some overview of what their research has been in this space and what they've been doing. So let's just dive into the first talk. The first speaker we've got today is from the Geological Survey of Queensland. Her name is Chamari, and she's a research fellow with SMI. So we're partnering in her postdoctoral research as university and government. So she's been working with us in government, but based at the university. Let's take it away, Chamari.
Thank you, Janelle. I will share the screen now. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, looks good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to this webinar to present this topic here today. So in this presentation, I'm going to give you a kind of a background of how circular economy in the mining sector would look like, and my current project with the GSQ and UQ, as mentioned by Janelle, and what I am doing at this stage. So circular economy is a production and a consumption model that seeks opportunities to keep resources within the system as long as possible at their highest value. So we want to reduce the disturb into the natural resources and keep the resources that already we have within the system as long as possible. So in a circular system, so we encourage more resources within the system and more renewable energies than fossil-based energies. And in the production, it should be more sustainable and circular. And in the production, the circularity should be considered in such a way that products can be designed for durability, reusability, repairability, disassembly. And also when it comes to use phase, users can use those resources as resources and the products as long as possible, and also they can reuse them through repairing, refurbishing, remanufacturing. And once it goes to end of life, they can be further recover value through recycling and can be embedded to the system back again. So this is how our circular economy system should look like in very simple format. This is a solar, it's a kind of solar panel producer in Netherlands. So as they claim, they say they use recycled materials in their production, then they produce products for more lightweight and also for disassembly. They don't mention anything about usability, so increase the or extend the life of products. But at the end of the use, they are recovering 100% materials and then use their production back. So it's a kind of an example how circular economy would look like in a system. So in a circular economy, it aims to decouple economic growth from natural resource consumption. So as I mentioned earlier, we want to give a nature a break, a time to regenerate and thrive, and we try to depend on the resources that already we have. That is the purpose, that is the mere purpose of the concept circular economy. But in this real world, in practically, we need resources. And especially with this energy transition, we need critical minerals. So still, circular economy, though you see there is a kind of a conflict between the circular economy concept itself and the purpose of the mining sector, is still the concept can be applied. So because this sector is also a sector that uses natural resources like land, water, energy, as well as other resources like tools, equipments, machineries, infrastructure that were also made out of natural resources. So still, the circular economic concept can be applied to the sector to make it more responsible. So in responsible practice to prove its responsible practice, and also in current days, investors or the market is high concern about how green or how organization take care of the environment. So adapting circular economic practices could prove them that they are more environmental concern sector. So circular economy, as I mentioned, so how it can be adapted to the mining sector. So this sector uses technical systems, tools, equipments, infrastructure, resources. So this diagram shows the circular economy practices that could be applied to a mining site. This was adapted from a Canadian report. So as they mentioned, the one important thing is rethink and redefine the waste. So our practice was just landfill waste at the end of mine activities, but instead of that, it's better to think about actually the waste that we say waste. Is it really a waste? For example, tire, for example, the mining tires. So the tires used, they were landfill, but for example, here, these are the revised policy practices issued by the Department of Environment, Science and Innovation. So as they suggested, so when you buy tire, it's better to have a conversation with your new suppliers, whether they can take them back. So, or you can recycle them, or you can use, generate energy. So a lot of options are there. Instead of just considering waste as a waste can be a resource or a value. So you can reuse, repair, refurbish existing resources, as well as also the product as a service system. So in a circular economy, we don't encourage buyers, but we encourage users. So you don't need to own a product to use it. So you can share it. So there are a lot of sharing platforms. So instead of just buying products or materials, resources, tools, they can be shared. When it comes to natural resources, a number of options that support circularity are also listed here. Instead of like replace or offset with low impact options, like instead of mine impacted fresh water, you can use mine impacted water. Instead of fossil based energy, use renewable energy. So think about low impact options, and also you can extract value from resources waste, like waste rocks can be used as aggregates, and also industrial symbiosis. So industrial symbiosis are relationships creates between one industry to another industry to use one's waste as a raw material or resource for another sector. So that kind of relationships or that kind of symbiosis is also applicable to this industry. For example, like residuals, like comes from copper, can be used in construction. And also rethinking mine reclamation. So instead of mine rehabilitate, so organizations, the miners can think beyond that, and they can be used as seasonal sports or fishing purposes or kind of natural park, and so give it a kind of economic value as well. But the thing is important to note that the circularity is a design question. So circularity should be think at the beginning, not at the end once you generate all the waste. So it's a design question, and technology plays a vital role. So to extract or not waste, reduce energy consumption, and use low level of water. So new technologies is required. So when we talked about circular economy and mining, we are always thinking about responsible mining. So as I mentioned, so apart from that, if miners, like they are resource suppliers, if they can look from their position to the forward chain, their product chain, so there is other possibilities, possible integrations for mine suppliers, resources suppliers to integrate with the product chain. So one is, I think, like ensure responsible production. So you are supplying resources. So instead of just supplying resources, for example, if you have kind of offtake agreements with some product manufacturer, you can demand at the beginning of that agreement, your resources should be used in a particular way that support the circularity. So what I want to say is, like, resource suppliers should have a kind of a control over the products they produce. At this current stage, most of the organizations, they don't have that kind of control over their products, but these thinking, these perspectives also should be able to adapt in the future and recover resources from end-of-use products. So instead of supplying materials, once the product use is over, then they can recover resources back. And materials as a service, so product as a service. So instead of selling materials, you can sell them as a service where the miners have the ownership of the materials, and then they can control the way they use product, and they can take them back once the consumption is over. So this is the kind of an overview of my project. So Minerals and the Circular Economy, Making the Connection, is a collaborative project between the SMI and GSQ. It was started with the vision of providing policy and industry recommendation to support the Geological Survey of Queensland to establish a circular economy function as part of the Queensland Resources Industry Development Plan. So this project was designed to find the answers. So what circular economy options are there? What enablers and barriers are there when they are trying to adapt those practices? What kind of support industry needs, and what's the role that government could play to make this transition a reality? So literature reviews and interviews were conducted as part of this project. So circularity can be achieved, or it can be driven by top-down, where government take all the initiatives by providing legislations, incentives, infrastructure, awareness, or bottom-up, where organizations drive this change to developing innovative technologies, business models, and supply chains. But researchers have argued that if we want to make an economic-wide transition, the top-down approach is the best approach. So this, in the figure 4, as is mentioned, these authors have gathered the barriers for circular economy in mining sector, and they have find the interrelationship linked between each and every barriers and make them in order. So as it mentioned, so the lack of governance measures implementations is the key issue that should be tackled first if we want to address other barriers, because this barrier drive the other barriers. So this is first issue, first barrier that should be eliminated or should be addressed if we want to make a economic transition as well as to remove other barriers. So therefore, as it mentions, government has a role to play. This shows 8 clusters for circular economic transition in a top-down approach. So 5 clusters are for government, where government provides policies, incentives, financial supports, infrastructure, society changing by changing attitude, and awareness, while organization develop product and processes, circular supportive product and processes through top management support. So as part of this project, so I conducted discussions with industry stakeholders. So I should mention that these discussions were between small to medium, like junior to mid-tier organization, not the large organizations, because the Queensland industry, majority of the Queensland industry represents by these organizations. So we identify these organizations need supports when we want to make this transition. So I had conversation with them, thorough conversations with the questions. So we found that the level of maturity of circular economy is very low among them, because circular economy is more single activities or not their priority activities at all. And they don't have kind of strategies or system-wide thinking for future or for system-wide transition. These organizations face a number of barriers where I cannot share the data they revealed because they are confidential, but as they mentioned, they face a number of barriers, which can be categorized as regulation related, especially when it comes to secondary prospectivity activities, and finance related. They don't have finance capacity to support circularity and infrastructure. Even though they want to kind of go for renewable energies, they can't afford this. So they don't have those resources. And the technology, they are kind of very late adapters. They are not very technology savvy. If something it's confirmed, and then only they are ready to adapt these technologies. And society and market, sometimes those products they concern not good as the product based on new materials. So these are also some challenges, and the knowledge related to the circular economy business models, and also issues comes with the nature of the industry, because this have a long lifespan, more than 100 years, and some infrastructure, they can't change those systems. So there are some issues related to the nature of this business, and also organization related issues, because circular economy is not their priority. They have other issues. They don't have required talent or time for that. So a number of barriers these organizations that I discussed, they have encountered a number of issues. So it emphasized that, as I mentioned earlier, most of the issues have to be addressed by the government. So it is more related to the 5 clusters that I mentioned. So instead of 8 clusters, I propose 9 clusters based on the nature of the industry. More research and innovation must be supported by the government level if we want to make this transition a reality. So again, it is proved that the top-down approach is the best approach, and government has a significant role to play if they are planning to make this transition within Queensland resources sector. So as this diagram says, the government dimension for circular economy. So government can act as a promoter of circular economy, facilitating the circular economy, and enablers by providing enabling conditions. So when you look at these barriers they face, the industry lack a lot of enabling conditions. So based on that ideas, this government dimension for circular economy and the research findings. So this was the proposed circular economy function for the department. So it will be driven by a clear vision, established set of goals, and proper metrics to measure the performance, and it will act as a facilitator and make the required relationship, cooperation, and collaboration with the intergovernment organization as well as other institutes like research institutes and community, and it provides all the enabling conditions. So these were the proposed units for the function. All these functions, these units are already in place in the Department of Resources and within GSQ as well. So they can either expand their current work to support circular economy, focusing circular economy, or they can establish a separate function focusing the circular economy and providing those enabling conditions. So what I am currently doing, so what we...
Summary. Just in the interest of time, can we wrap up in the next couple of minutes?
Okay, sure. So these are my current work. So I'm conducting interviews with other territories to learn from their experiences, because this is a kind of a system-wide change. So it's a change. So we want to know how they made this change and how we convince other people to support this change. So I'm also looking for theories related to human behavior as well. Yeah, that's also, thank you so much. So I just wanted to tell you, like, circularity can be adapted in the mining sector as well. So government has a motivation for that and taking actions, and government definitely has a role to play for that. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That's a wonderful call to action for government to make industry more able to embrace these concepts. You do have some questions in the Q&A function. Just in the interest of time, we're going to go to the next speaker, but we do have a Q&A session at the end of this program, at the end of the talk. So feel free to pop the answer to the question in the Q&A, Chamari, and we can loop back to it if we've got some time at the end. So our next speaker is Julia, and she is from the Sustainable Minerals Institute at the University of Queensland. She's a research fellow there. And I think it's another talk on circular economy, is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
All right, take this away.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Let me share my screen. Okay, is everything good?
Yeah, looks great. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, thanks for the invitation to participate in this webinar series. I have been following it for some time. So I'm Juliana, or Juliana, as you prefer. I'm a research fellow as part of the Development Minerals Program and Julius Krasny Mineral Research Center at the Sustainable Minerals Institute. And today I'm going to talk about how we need to rethink mining in a circular economy context and how this can be done through ore sand production. I want to support the previous acknowledgement of the country, and also on behalf of GSQ, express our acknowledgement to traditional owners and the custodianship of the lands on which we meet, and also pay our respect to their ancestors and descendants, and also recognize their valuable contributions to society. Today I'm gonna talk about first, I want to provide an introduction to show you why is this important, because mining is related to two global crises, and how and that's why we need to rethink mining in a circular economy, and how solutions like ore sand can provide a sustainable option at scale, and how this ore sand concept emerged, and also how we are transferring this concept to other regions and deposits, and some final takeaways. So the first global challenge related to mining is the continuous increase in mine waste within the current linear model. So about 13 billion tons of tailings waste plus 10 tons of billion tons of waste rock are generated every year. And there are also more than 8,000 tailings storage facilities that and more than many of them are active, and also many of them are abandoned. So and with the energy transition, we will need to extract even more resources, so we can potentially reach a staggering trillion tons of mine waste in the next decades. And the tailings dam collapse disasters continue to happen. So on the other hand, we have a second global challenge related to mining, and is the sustainable supply of crushed rock, gravel, and sand, collectively known as aggregates. So those materials are the second most exploited after the second most exploited natural resources after water. And we currently extract and produce about 50 billion tons of aggregates every year. On the other hand, sand is largely unregulated in many mining regions, and countries. So, and secondary sources of sand and aggregates are available, but they still not satisfy the global demand. So we need to rethink mining in a circular economy. After the Second World War, the global economy grew very rapidly, and waste management started to be a big issue. In the 70s, the Club of Rome started to raise concerns about running out of resources and the growth limits. So the reduce, reuse, recycle idea gained momentum, but initially from a reactive or end-of-pipe approach focused on managing the waste. So in the 90s, there started to emerge a new paradigm. So systems thinking and also life cycle assessment approaches emerged. So and with the objective to design more proactive approaches in general, and clean production as well. So those concepts laid the groundwork of what we know as the circular economy. And a truly or strongly sustainable circular economy should aim to minimize the negative impacts and maximize the benefits of products, services, and businesses throughout their life cycle in the social, environmental, and economic domains. So in this sense, mining is understood within two life cycle contexts. The first one is the life cycle of the mining project, from exploration through development, design, construction, operation, the commissioning, and post-mining. And the second is the life cycle of the product, which comes in the value chain context, and from local to global context. And so circularity strategies can be implemented throughout both life cycles and are known as the R imperatives, like reduce, reuse, remanufacture, recycle, etc. And for mining, there are huge potential benefits, especially at the design stage, but also at the operation stage. So ICMM has also recognized the importance of adopting holistic thinking in mining in order to align with circular economy principles. And this is done through focusing on at the operation level on the circularity of processes, but also through the value chain or product circularity. In the conventional or linear way of processing ores, there are huge amount of waste materials produced, and they are typically stored over time with associated social and environmental risks. There have been some attempts for repurposing those materials, but with limited success because those are not fit for purpose, right? And there is also negative public perception, societal concerns about using those materials. In many cases, it may be economically unfeasible to justify the repurposing of those wastes, especially when the mining activities have stopped. So in that context, ore sand emerged as a proactive circular economy solution that drastically reduces mine waste at the source and helps to mitigate the negative effects of unsustainable sand supply. So we are focusing on the top of the mineral waste hierarchy, or making a smarter use of the mineral resources. So ore sand can be defined as a type of processed sand sourced as a co-product or a byproduct of mineral ores. And it usually comes after crushing and grinding, and physical and physicochemical beneficiation processes that are typically set up for the mineral concentrates recovery. But it also includes the optimization of those processes and also the addition of more processing steps in order to achieve the required characteristics of sand. So how did the ore sand concept emerge? This is a journey of about a decade, and it started in 2013 with Dr. Emil Shephers from Vale when he was doing his MBA. His project was focused on designing an engineered stone made of tailings, iron ore tailings. So at that point, it was a very innovative solution, but wasn't scaled up at that time. So, and after that, unfortunately, there were two major tragedies happening in the Minas Gerais region in Brazil, associated to iron ore operations, and was the collapse of tailings storage facilities in Mariana and Brumadinho. So after the second disaster in Brumadinho, the Brazilian government decided to ban the upstream tailings storage facilities. So Vale recognized the need for innovating in the iron ore processes. And at the same time, UNEP started to raise awareness about the global sand supply crisis. So Vale started to invest in research and development and partnering with different organizations, including the University of Queensland. So UQ and also University of Geneva and Federal University of Minas Gerais worked collaboratively on a one-year research project, and they basically came up with the ore sand concept and also validated the Brucutus ore sand material and provided also a global perspective on the subject. And also UNEP highlighted this case study as an example of outstanding example of circular economy in the mining sector. And after that, Vale also more recently, they created a spin-off company, Agera, which is focused on expand the commercialization of their ore sands. So as part of this work, there was an independent sampling at Brucutu plant in Minas Gerais, Brazil. And so as part of this study, there was a comprehensive characterization of the material in order to assess physical, chemical, environmental, geotechnical, mineralogical properties. And it was possible to conclude that this material is a suitable substitute for conventional sand, especially in construction, but it's also possible to further upgrade it in order to achieve the required characteristics for industrial applications like glass making. So in this report, there was also an estimation of the environmental footprint of ore sand compared to conventional sands, and it was found that in terms of greenhouse gases, this material brings environmental benefits. But as in other aggregates, those conclusions are also dependent on how ore sand is, or the mine site that produces ore sand is close to the markets, and how this material is transported. So those are crucial factors in order to justify the environmental sustainability of those products. And there was also a comprehensive market analysis, which concluded that almost a third of the mine sites can find some demand for ore sand within a 50-kilometer range. And so then in case where mine sites are far from from the markets, they still can make a use of their ore sand for their own purposes on site. And also they should also encourage having more effective transport systems like rail networks linked to ports, because that will help to reach other global markets. So countries like China, India, Mexico, and Chile were identified as potential major producers of ore sand. And we have been leading the expansion of this circular economy solution globally through multiple partnerships with research institutions, industry, governments, and other stakeholders. And those examples of those collaborations are, for instance, we are organizing a workshop it will be in early June, and with the support of SMI ICE Chile and also some Chilean universities like Pontifical Catholic University and Catholic University of the North. Another initiative is this year we will have 2 new PhD students commencing their studies focusing on ore sand related research, and they will be hosted by University of Exeter and also by University of Queensland as part of the QUEX joint PhD initiative. But now let's focus on Australia. So this is a project we have with Newmont. Cadia is a copper gold mining operation in New South Wales. And after the release of the report of the work done with Vale, they engaged with us and on a research project focused on characterizing one of their byproducts from the coarse particle flotation equipment or hydrofloat. And we comprehensively characterized this material and found that it can be a promising source of ore sand with improved particle size distribution compared to Vale sand, especially for construction purposes. And in addition, we also confirmed that ore sands in general have distinctive characteristics like particle shape. They are angular, but still less angular than manufactured sand, which makes them suitable for multiple applications. And we are also advancing this project and now looking at accelerating the commercialization of this material through the Australia Economic Accelerator Seed Grant. And this is a very good example. And we are also partnering with the School of Civil Engineering and also with Aurecon. And another important initiative in Australia is a project we have with the Queensland Department of Resources. And in this case, we are focusing on Queensland. And the idea is to apply circular economy principles in Queensland energy transition minerals. And the first stage of this project is to map ore sand potential in Queensland using a geospatial approach with the support of a master's student. And the second stage is to have a deeper understanding of the environmental and social implications of ore sand. So from a life cycle perspective, and for this, we have 2 potential approaches, like a detailed case study, hopefully with the support of an industry partner based in Queensland. But if that is not possible, then we can do a preliminary hotspot analysis with a regional focus. And so there is 1 manuscript under preparation. And we are also working collaboratively with a QUEX strategic project, and particularly with Dr. Juan Soto from the UQ School of Economics. So as final takeaways, I want to emphasize that ore sand is a product by design and not repurposed waste. And this material has distinctive attributes that might be appealing to specific markets. Also, the characteristics of ore sand strongly depend on the ore body. and also the process configuration. So this will determine the technical feasibility and also the potential applications of the material. And we also want to highlight that innovative technologies like hydrofloat, for instance, can allow creating a higher quality ore sand. And there are also many places where there are potential for sources of ore sand and a huge waste reduction potential. But this solution needs to be analyzed on a case-by-case approach, because we also need to make sure it will address a sustainability aspects like quality aspects, regulation, standardization, also the management of residual tailings, the contribution to the just transition, among others. Thank you very much, and here you can find a link to our website.
All right, thank you so much. We are just a little bit behind time, but there was a very quick question, hopefully quick question that came up. Oh, it was in the chat, I think. Would you be able to jump in the chat and see if you can reply to the question from the delightfully named Who Man? And we will scoot across to our next presenter. So next up, we have Artem. So Artem is with the Geological Survey of Queensland as well. He is in one of the teams next to us, next to the minerals team. He works as an economist in a group that looks at the resources sector and characterizing the resources sector. So I think we're changing tack a little bit and thinking about ESG now. Is that correct, Artem?
Thank you, Janelle. Yes, it's correct. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Artem Golev. I'm a lead economist in ESG and minerals at GSQ. I'm, in a sense, wearing two hats, which the major probably is minerals, but it doesn't make ESG any less important. In many cases, ESG nowadays even more important for developing a new project, such as, for example, new mine. Traditionally, all you need to do is just find a good grade, convince your shareholders, but with ESG being so impactful in the world, now we have to convince as well the environmental credentials and satisfy certain criteria, as well as social and governance aspects as well important. Today, I would like to show a few slides on and provide a broader overview what is ESG at the Queensland resources sector. Starting with ESG-related policies and strategies, it's quite a hot topic, especially in the last couple of years. Lots of new policies and strategies been released. And then, as an example, I will use Queensland Resources Industry Development Plan, and then we'll go into more detail around emissions. It's an important part of our decarbonization efforts. And at the end, I will present some ESG credential and ratings for Queensland and our industries. So what was happening in the last 2 years? Less than 2 years ago, we released Queensland Resources Industry Development Plan. If you wonder, whether ESG is important for this plan, it goes all the way towards 2050. You can guess how many times ESG term is used in this document, and the document is just over 60 pages. Then after that, there was a release of Queensland Energy and Jobs Plan. Again, goes towards 2040. In the middle of this 2-year period, we saw a release of voluntary ESG framework. This is driven by industry. Nevertheless, it's an important part as well in our ESG efforts. An example, how I can explain in a plain language to industry, especially to exploration companies, what do you need to do and how you can satisfy the ESG criteria. More recently, we saw a release of Queensland Critical Minerals Strategy in June last year. And just a month or two ago, Queensland Battery Industry Strategy as well was released. And towards the end of the year, we also expect to see Clean Economy Jobs Act with a very strong focus on emissions and decarbonization as well. There were some important policies and strategies at the federal level as well, so I thought I mentioned those. Mineral Council of Australia started the implementation of TSM framework. This is one of many different ESG-related frameworks and standards. TSM stands for Towards Sustainable Mining. It developed originally in Canada, but now it's been applied across several countries, and Australia is also will apply this. This is, of course, driven by industries. But important difference of TSM from other frameworks, it is applied at the facility level, or I think at the mine site level, unlike most frameworks at the corporate level. So 2023, this is when they started, and by 2026, the implementation will be complete. Then we saw as well as the release of Australian Critical Mineral Strategy, the same time frame as Queensland Strategy from 2023 to 2030, and more recently, the reformed safeguard mechanism. Not everyone may be familiar or heard about safeguard mechanism. It's around emissions, decarbonization in the country. And people who even heard about it may not realize that the core part of this mechanism is actually the resources sector. The safeguard mechanism applied to high emitters, more than 100 kilotons of CO2 equivalent per year, except electricity generators. So in the country like Australia, if you remove electricity generators, what you're left with essentially is the resources sector. So the safeguard mechanism is essentially our regulation around decarbonization of the resources sector in Australia and in Queensland in particular. Almost every single safeguard facility in Queensland is in the resources sector. And last but not least, there was just a month ago a joint statement released by Canada and Australia on cooperation on critical minerals, and the very first area where they want to cooperate called drive robust ESG efforts. So that's again tells you how important ESG nowadays is. And if you made a guess, the ESG term was mentioned 53 times in Queensland Resources Industry Development Plan. Let's go into this plan into more detail. So what is our vision? So we want to see a resilient, responsible, and sustainable industry that grows as it transforms. So how do we transform, and what this transformation means? This is where ESG comes into place. So it tells us what do we want to see, what type of transformation we want to see in our industry. ESG, of course, stands for environmental, social, and governance. And in the document, there is as well an explanation what ESG is. So you can see if you haven't had a chance yet. The ESG applied to two levels. Of course, it's at the state level. So we want to see ESG credentials and of our state, as well as at the sector level, at the industry level. And for the industry, we want to see industry being the leader in ESG. We want to see decarbonized operations, and we want them to be aligned with circular economy, as well as consistently exceeding regulatory requirements. It may be a little bit difficult to understand, so I thought I'd provide an extra slide, trying to explain what actually do we mean by this? What are the examples? What are we trying to do in the mining sector, for example, in terms of environment and emissions? So towards 2050, what we want to see, mine sites are increasingly powered by renewable energy. We want to see electric, hybrid, or hydrogen-powered vehicles to reduce emissions. We want to see renewables precincts and other opportunities for sites approaching closure, as well as we want to see carbon capture and storage or other projects. And what is our status at the moment? In Queensland, the resources sector is responsible roughly for about 40% of all our emissions, including Scope 2. Scope 2 is electricity-related emissions. And the major components, it's as well important to understand the structure of emissions in some cases, because this is how you can actually see what are the opportunities and is it even possible to reduce emissions. So we have fuel combustion, about 40%, electricity, about 30%, and fugitive emissions, almost 30%. This, of course, varies between sectors. And this is where you can see, okay, if we decarbonize the electricity grid, at maximum, we can decrease our emissions in the resources sector by about 30% on average. And so we have to do a bit more than just decarbonize electricity generation. And more than 90% of our emissions are with high emitters in the resources sector. So again, that's important to know because the safeguard mechanism, again, national policy are mainly targeting these high emitters. And this information is actually public, so we can go to the Clean Energy Regulator website and we can actually see who are these companies and how much they emit. So I decided to make an extra slide actually to show you what are the sectors. So most of emissions in Queensland in the resources sector are with coal mines. We are a very big coal producer, of course. Then we have oil and gas sector. We have a very significant aluminium sector, 2 alumina refineries and aluminium smelter in Gladstone. Then we have metal ore mining. They are relatively small emitters because it's only the first stage in minerals processing. And then we have, of course, other sectors such as cement production, chemicals, and fertilizer. So our emissions have been increasing all the way towards 2021. Most recent statistics shows a slight decline, and the latest data hasn't been released yet, but most likely we will see flat results. So not much has changed. But what we want to see in the future, we want to see a decrease in those emissions, and it's a very long way to go. You can also see some renewable energy projects that have been happening, so that's a very positive change. And you can see, for example, we have solar plants in Vipa at Rio Tinto's bauxite operations. We have projects at Mount Isa for renewable energy and Juliana Creek area for wind turbines. And of course, along the eastern coast, we can see a lot of solar, wind, as well as battery projects. Either already happened or will happen soon. So this will help our industries in their efforts for decarbonization. So what are our credentials? From a credentials point of view, you may know or may not that we have a Queensland Sustainability Report over the last 3 years. It has been released by Queensland Treasury. In this report, they have separate sections for every component of ESG. One component is environmental, of course, and one is social, and one is governance. Very detailed explanation, more than 100 pages, where you can see and understand what are our credentials and what are the improvements, what are our targets towards 2050 in particular for decarbonization. But it's hard to understand. We want to see something more simple. Are we better than others? What is our rating as one single number? So I thought I put a couple more pictures here on this slide. So one is an example from Morgan Stanley Capital International, MCSI ratings. In 2021, they rated Queensland as AA. So essentially, the red ones is a very bad rating, yellow is medium, and green ones are good. So it's a very good rating for Queensland. They haven't updated that since then. Another example of ratings is Investment Attractiveness Index for mining, done by Fraser Institute in Canada. So we can see 2021 and 2022, and in a couple months' time, they will be probably released in 2023. The difference for this rating, you also actually can see ourselves positioned, how we positioned against other jurisdictions. Are we better than Western Australia, for example? Are we better than Canada or South Africa? And who are our competitors, in a sense, to attract investment in the mining sector? So that's, again, we can see, yes, we are somewhere in the leaders, but we are not the top, not the top jurisdiction. We did the same analysis for our companies last year as part of Geological Survey ESG report. So we were trying to see, okay, let's pick companies with assets in Queensland. So again, this is rating for corporate level, not facility level. In many cases, other countries might affect how the company look like, not necessarily a good reflection of what the company does in Queensland. Nevertheless, it's very similar to what we've done, to what we've seen for Queensland in total. It's roughly A or maybe AA in some cases. So relatively good position for Queensland companies. And we, of course, want to see an improvement in those ratings. This is important for attracting investment and positioning ourselves as a reliable and responsible supplier of mineral resources. one more at the very end. I think I still have a little bit of time to add. As a part of our critical mineral strategy, there will be, in the middle of the year, there will be a new portal coming live for Queensland. It's a critical minerals focused portal for investors. A lot of information that we have and we share with everyone in the industry and beyond. It's on the GSQ open data portal, but there will be more specifically targeting investors information coming in the middle of the year. So perhaps some of the ESG related information will also find its way. So I look forward to this new critical minerals portal. Thank you. Janelle?
Thank you so much, Artem. Sorry, you ran to time so well that I was a bit caught off guard, I have to say. I think we have time for one very quick question, and if you want to take it offline because it might be a detailed answer, you're welcome to do that. But one of the people in chat was interested in your thoughts around sequestration and the viability and role of sequestration in this decarbonisation effort. No pressure to answer because I know it's a tricky one. It's
a very political question. If you're talking about carbon storage, whether we will allow, or we haven't allowed yet, but that's just a very debatable question. The sequestration on the surface level, yes, we have those projects, and I think those definitely should go ahead. Soil-related, for example, or mine tailings-related projects. But the carbon storage, yeah, well, we can leave it for a more detailed discussion. I think that's a great answer to what is a very tricky political question. So thank you, Artem. Our next presenters are not with the government or universities, so we're going to change pace a little bit and talk to a couple of our industry colleagues. So first up, we have Kieren, and he is the co-founder and CEO of Voconic, I believe it's called.
Well done.
I got some coaching in the background. So please take it away. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Great, thanks so much, and hi everybody. I'm going to take a slightly different take at ESG and really be thinking about some of the inputs for robust reporting and really interesting, exciting ways that I think ESG is presenting and providing to industry and community to think about how their interests may align in the use of ESG as a mechanism. Okay, so as a kind of broad context setter, it's really difficult in around the world in developing and managing projects, development of new projects, renewable energy projects, mining projects. We work in 15 countries around the world and see the same issues emerge in most places. But when communities don't have constructive ways to be heard, they will find creative ways to influence development. And so a lot of our work is about creating constructive channels for communities to speak into the decision spaces that influence their lives, to have a say about the way development takes place and how projects are run. Now, for me in this space, social performance as an expression of the way a company manages its relationships, thinks about how it engages with community. It's a real differentiator in a way that, say, we've just heard governments think about companies, but also I think in a growing way, the way that communities speak to each other in terms of track record of companies that are new to an area in the way that they're going to develop and run an operation. These are dynamic relationships that effectively are a contest of interests across time. And the consequences for companies in getting that wrong are significant, even existential. And I think in the context of renewable development and deployment, the race to deploy enough capacity to make a difference to global warming is really existential. But strong social performance also reduces risk, it increases freedom to operate, and ideally improves community outcomes. And for me, the rise of ESG, whilst it creates significant greater reporting requirements on mining companies in particular that I work with and talk to, my sense is that it also provides a significant opportunity for the alignment of those interests between communities and companies. What I'm really referring to here, the thing that's really captured my interest and attention in the last couple of years are sustainability-linked loans. And we've got an example here from Anglo American. They secured a $100 million 10-year loan facility from the International Finance Corporation. And the thing about sustainability-linked loans is that you get better rates on that money if you can demonstrate performance against agreed ESG performance targets. And so those targets typically are really heavily weighted around environment, governance, and then in the social space, almost exclusively focus on internal metrics. So things like health and safety performance, diversity and inclusion metrics, those things that are effectively inside the fence. Only 22% of sustainability-linked loans in a review of about 180 loans that have been written at the time had any social indicators of performance included, and they were exclusively internally focused. So this, in talking to Anglo American, this loan that they secured was the first to have an externally facing social goal incorporated into its performance criteria, and that was around educational outcomes in communities surrounding their operations in South Africa. So we've got some ways to go to make the external social performance activities of companies even visible, let alone really driving that alignment of interests through mechanisms like that. And what I'm going to do now is really just explain broadly about how we are providing companies with data that is robust, that's systematic, that's consistent across locations, across time, to support the use of that social data in things like sustainability-linked loans to align the interests of communities and companies in the execution of their activities. So we call our localized process for giving voice to communities Volcanic Local Voices. We're operating that service in 15 countries, a lot in mining jurisdictions, and it's effectively a dynamic science-based community listening program to identify key social risks for a company, but also to help a company understand the risks that they are visiting upon those communities, and through that to help them understand greater opportunities to develop and deepen those relationships with those communities, and then through that to inform social performance strategy, as well as on the ground tactical planning and action in the execution of their work. This work is based on about a decade of science that I led in CSIRO, and we spun out Volcanic in 2019, helpfully a year before a global pandemic, which was exciting, but also really fantastic for prompting innovation and the way that you collect data face to face in some of the most remote locations in the world. So we've established this framework for listening to community in an anonymous, confidential way, bringing that data inside the decision spaces of companies to inform the way that they think about and engage back with those communities. In this work, we have a particular way that we collect that data. We use surveys primarily, although we will complement that with qualitative data collection and a number of other ways of listening to community effectively. But in terms of surveys, we really like them because they give us a really efficient way to get beyond the loudest voices and access the views of that middle 90% of community with whom you are seeking to build and maintain a social license to operate. and also allows us to do really sophisticated, interesting things with that data to provide companies advice around the actions that they should be taking in a language that they can understand. So numbers, boxes, and arrows are a really useful way to equip engagement functions, social performance functions, with an equivalence of language inside the businesses that they support. So we have two types of survey. The first is an anchor survey. We call it that because it really anchors our process. It's a detailed baseline survey where we're measuring a whole bunch of interaction points between community and a company. That encompasses things like community well-being, resilience and capacity to manage change, really key attributes in those dynamic environments. We're of course looking at impacts and benefits that flow from mining, as well as relational factors, things like procedural fairness, or the ability of a company to listen effectively to community concerns and take action based on those concerns, but also looking at distributional fairness, the extent to which the benefits that flow from that mining operation are felt to be shared equitably within those communities. We also explore confidence in governance, and our key outcome measures in this work are trust in the company and acceptance of its activities, which is our proxy measure for social license to operate. And in some ways, in the context of ESG, what we're doing is asking community to reflect back to us and to the company their take on the company's performance in each of those domains: environment, social, and governance. I think it's an interesting nascent way to be thinking about this kind of interaction. Now, the results of the anchor survey then feed into the second type of survey, which is what we call pulse surveys. These are very short, 5-7 minute surveys that track the material issues identified by the anchor survey in the relationship at hand. And we're doing that across the operational footprint of a project, and often beyond what a mining project will or operation will consider to be its tightly confined area of operation. We're really looking to extend into where they have a relationship and where they need to be thinking carefully about their social license to operate. Now, those pulse surveys also give us an opportunity to explore focal topics. They're issues that might be emergent, they might be strategic, so the company might be looking to develop a new local procurement program or strategy. And so what we can do is to help them to understand how to shape that program to most effectively deliver not only better outcomes for the business and to look good in their sustainability reporting, but to actually be aligned with the needs and interests and capacities of that local community. And of course, as with COVID, as a great example, when an urgent issue emerges and other ways for engaging community might evaporate, we can use or repurpose the local voices platform to be engaging with communities about other things in other ways. Now, the frequency of those pulse surveys is really determined by the dynamism of that relationship, but typically that might be quarterly or 2 or 3 times a year, depending on where and how that relationship looks. And really the sequence of activities is really captured in this diagram. We're really trying to build this drumbeat within community and create and then support a new channel for them to be speaking inside the company that they're living alongside. Now, in each of those survey activities, we have this kind of circularity of activities. Of course, we're getting the survey out there into the world, designing that with site, but also ensuring that we have strong consistency with all the other surveys that we are conducting around the world, to enable us to build benchmarks and access our data lake, to support them with peer-based reflections and also comparisons in that data. We're then analysing that data to understand the drivers of community trust and acceptance in the anchor survey, and then tracking those across time. And then using those analyses to empower companies and communities to access that data through a really key component of this process, which is closing the loop with community. We're really not about that data disappearing into a black hole within the company, but really work hard to make sure that we're able to provide a summary of that data back to community and to support companies to use those summaries in their interactions back with community. So effectively using that as a great way to ask better questions, which is a very different approach to how often those engagement takes place. And then, of course, because of the circularity of this process, we're able to measure the effectiveness of those changes, those interventions, those strategies that are employed by those customers back with community. And all of that data is provided to customers in interactive dashboards so that they can really cut that data by whatever demographic feature or variable or time point is relevant to them in the moment without needing a data scientist. And we wrap all of this process within a transparent, innovative community engagement process, which includes, for example, a community rewards program. So for every survey that's completed, we make a donation based on participation back to community on the company's behalf, thereby echoing the same principle that underpins this process, which is an individual effort leading to a community level outcome. All right, so we're getting that data, we're collecting it, we're bringing it inside. And really at the heart of this process in the anchor survey data is what you're looking at here. This is the product of a path analysis, a really sophisticated statistical technique that allows us to understand the relative importance of each of the key issues or interaction points that community members are having with a company on acceptance or social license of the company. And what you can see here, I'll just break it down what you're looking at here and then tell its story. The numbers represent beta weights. These are standardized coefficients, which means that we can compare them to each other. And that's really important because we can tell, for example, that company responsiveness has 3 times as powerful an impact on improving trust within community as distributional fairness. And that then allows us to help a company to build a prioritized list of actions and to know that if they focus on their top 3 drivers of trust and acceptance, that's going to have the best bang for their resource dollars in engaging with community and shaping their engagement strategies. Now, the other thing that I want to point out here is that trust sits very centrally in this model, as it does in most of the models that we generate from survey data around the world. And that's not because we place trust there, it's because it's the best fit of the model to the data. And what that really is telling us is that trust acts as a kind of universal mediator in these relationships between companies and communities. It translates community expectations and experiences on the left-hand side into their level of acceptance on the right-hand side. And so this then in part helps to explain another phenomenon we see in this space, which is that working to avoid rejection or working to build acceptance within the community through transactional activities is going to help in some ways, but it's actually not going to influence those aspects of the relationship that are really driving acceptance, that are really improving acceptance via trust. So we're able to help a company to focus on material issues in the relationship, as well as those that are helping to build trust or give within that relationship. And we can go further in this data as well. So each of those boxes contains questions from the survey. And what we can do is to go deeper and look at which elements of environment, for example, or procedural fairness, this company responsiveness box, are actually doing most of the work in that modeling. And so, again, to help them to focus on the particular issues in those relationships that are really most relevant. Now, whilst the major drivers of trust are going to be fairly consistent across the location, their order of importance and the particular issues on the left-hand side that are driving trust really does vary quite substantively, not only across locations, but also across time as a relationship matures through the life cycle of an operation. So once we've got that list of material issues, we're then tracking those across time. And so each of these dots represents a point in time when we've collected data. This is publicly available data from Rio Tinto, where we work with them in the Pilbara and are are rolling out to all of their sites around the world. And what we can help a company to understand is the efficacy, the effectiveness of their social performance strategies in building stronger, deeper relationships in their local context, as well as, in this case, the effect of a critical incident like Juukan Gorge on their trust and acceptance within those local communities. What we're also looking to do is to enable those teams to get out and engage the right parts of their community about the right issue. And so what we've got here is an example of how we can split data by rural and urban locations on the one hand, but even go deeper and break down particular blocks of data like this. We've got 2 different blocks within our urban sample here, and we can see that actually it's block 2 in this rural location where that team really need to get out and engage. But we'll even go down to neighbourhood level in some locations and support a team to really go out and engage on the right issues. And what that does is very, from the get-go, helps community to understand that the company is listening, that it's willing to engage on the issues that are meaningful to them without having to establish what they are at the outset of an engagement activity. In the dashboard and in the survey activities as well, we also like to help communities or enable communities to tell us about their relationship with a local company in their own words, to be able to characterize the numbers and provide context and richness for those data narratives. And what we've got here is an example from one of our dashboards. This one is Powerlink. We're very open with their data and engaging other actors in the renewable energy network, showing that whilst we can do word clouds and things like that, we're wanting to go further than that as well. So building machine learning tools in to analyze thematically that data, and then allowing customers to be able to click on these terms within these word clouds, and then below to see all of the comments that use those terms. So again, you can work backwards and forwards through that dashboard to build a story through which you can evaluate your engagement strategies and social performance more broadly and refine it to the needs of your social license attributes. But moving now to where we're really seeing some exciting application of this data in the context of ESG, and remembering that one of the things that I think is really missing in this space is the development of robust social data that has practical application within the ESG space. What we're seeing with a couple of different customers is them really grabbing that bull by the horns and pushing the limits to lead in this space. So the first one I wanted to mention is one of our customers, Lundin Mining. We're working at 6 and soon to be 7 of their locations in 5 different countries, using their community perception data of their environmental impacts in their reporting, annual reporting back to market. So in their profit reporting, but also in sustainability reporting, and thereby holding themselves accountable to their performance in the field as perceived by their local communities. I think that's an incredibly brave position to take, given there are lots of things that influence those environmental perceptions alongside what a company is doing. The second area I wanted to mention is related to sustainability-linked loans. We've been working with a company on a sustainability-linked loan, the second loan ever to have this external-facing social data as a key criteria for success within that loan for cheaper rates. So we worked with 5 major banks as part of that deal for them across 6 mining assets. And what we've decided to do there is to use procedural fairness as the key social metric. And we've got the 4 measures that are included there, the bottom left-hand corner. And so those measures will be used in every anchor and pulse survey from now on for each of those locations. and they will be judged based on their performance at a point in time each year, with goals that we're able to develop through really sophisticated analysis of how much procedural fairness typically varies within a site, between sites, and varies based on starting positions, a baseline position on procedural fairness. And why I think procedural fairness is such a really interesting, impactful variable to be including is that, one, it's really in the control of a company. So the extent to which people feel you're listening to them is really very much based on the extent to which you are effectively listening to community, but also because it gives those banks exposure to other variables. Procedural fairness is very strongly correlated with environmental impact perception, for example, but also contact quality and the interactions people have with a company, and other variables that often pop up in our modelling. And in doing that, we're able to help them to define 3 different bands that their operations sit in, that will then define both their goals and also their stretch targets that will unlock value for the company in that sustainability-linked loan. And because procedural fairness, or the quality of that relationship, is the key measurement of that success, will lead to better outcomes for communities as well. The real power in this alignment of interests is that it elevates social performance to the CFO level. And so that position will now be asking the GM for social performance how they're going and why they're not performing well enough to unlock that value, or even to trigger a consequence for the mining company based on their social performance. So I think it's an incredibly powerful device, and I think a really exciting area that is its very early beginnings, and we're looking to really support the development of over the coming years. I'll leave it there and look forward to continuing the conversation with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Kieren. That was really fascinating. And you have prompted some questions in chat. Unfortunately, we are running a little bit behind schedule. So I'm going to ask you to jump in the chat and answer them. We do have a Q&A session coming up just after our next presenter, which is Phoebe. So if you can hang on, we can also answer them live after we see Phoebe's presentation. So Phoebe is the country director for Australia for a company by the name of Minviro, I believe, and I will let you take it away. Thank you very much.
Perfect, thanks so much. Can you see my screen all okay?
Yeah, it looks all good.
Good. Cool. So today I will be presenting around how life cycle assessments, that was briefly touched on earlier, and how it links to the circular economy. And what I'll run us through is a little bit about what a life cycle assessment really is, what regulations, especially in the international space right now, are impacting life cycle assessments, and then putting some case studies to highlight how it's being utilized. So a little bit about Minviro. Minviro is a specialized service and technology company, and we essentially apply a life cycle assessment to evaluate and mitigate environmental impacts for mining and metal projects. And we've worked with a variety of companies from the junior space in the critical raw materials industry all the way up to downstream battery manufacturers and car manufacturers. And to give a bit more context about what a life cycle assessment is, essentially, it's a methodology that you can apply to quantify and understand the environmental impacts of a product or a process throughout its entire life cycle. So this can start from raw material extraction in the mining stage, going through to the processing, distribution of that product, going to the use by the consumers, and then finally into that recovery. So if that's going to go to landfill and waste, or if it's actually going to be recycled back into the system, which is of course linking to our circular economy. It's all done to an ISO standard, and there is tailored ISO standards for life cycle assessments in the raw materials, chemicals, and battery sector. And it does not only focus on climate change. So it actually looks at around 16 plus impact categories, which are detailed here. Depending on how much attention you're paying, there is only 13 points on my screen, but some of them do subdivide into subcategories under one umbrella. But the one I really want to highlight here is climate change is, I guess, the celebrity of the environmental impact reporting world. And then you've got things that are also very, very crucial, such as water scarcity, things like resource use. And then depending on the project or process that you're looking at, things like dust, which would be under particulate matter, or chemicals impacting waterways, such as eutrophication, are also very, very critical within an LCA. Zoning in slightly more to climate change. So how a life cycle assessment essentially differentiates from your greenhouse gas scope 1 and 2 reporting is that a life cycle assessment climate change impact really encompasses all of your scope 1, 2, and 3. And just to clarify, so your scope 1 is very much those direct emissions from the combustion of fuel on site, with your scope 2 being the embodied emissions from importing energy. However, your scope 3 is not only your upstream and downstream transport, it's also the embodied emissions associated with all of your materials. So if you've got a mine and a concentrator, then what we're also looking at here is the embodied impact of all of those reagents that you're consuming in your concentrating plant. Now, how you actually do a life cycle assessment. The methodology itself does not change. You can apply it to lots and lots of different products, and you will still follow the same 4 steps. So the first step, you really want to define your goal and scope. So the goal, fairly obvious, what are we trying to achieve? And the scope is very much around what is the boundary and the units that we're setting to help us achieve our goal for this specified product. And then we're going to collect our life cycle inventory. This would be your data. So in the case of a life cycle assessment, you really want to collect all the raw materials and energy required to produce your product. And then what we do is then we're going to calculate the actual impact assessment itself. And this is going to be taking your foreground data, which is your life cycle inventory, and you're going to be multiplying this by your background data, which is then those embodied impacts of all of those energy sources and those reagents that you're consuming. And that is going to essentially calculate the actual impact of producing those products. And it will highlight where all the hotspots are. And then finally, the whole way through, we're always going to be doing some detailed interpretation. So if energy is one of our largest impacts, why is this? Is it because the embodied impact of this grid source is actually very fossil fuel based, or is it because of the amount of energy you actually require in your process? On the flip side, if it's in the terms of reagents, it could be, for example, you actually use quite a lot of sodium hydroxide, and sodium hydroxide does not have a very low embodied impact at all. So I know that it's quite common to be a bit surprised that sometimes your scope 3 emissions are actually your largest contributor to your overall footprint. Now, what you can see on the right-hand side here is a system boundary. So life cycle assessment is all based on boundaries. And what you tend to do within that scope is you define your boundary. You include the energy and the raw materials required to produce that product in that boundary and any of those associated emissions to land, air, and water. And then anything downstream or outside of that boundary, you won't include. So in this case, we're looking at extraction and processing to produce a product, but then we will not be including the impact of the use of that product itself. Now that we're all experts on life cycle assessments, why are they important, and why are they differing from current environmental impact assessments that are happening, which are mandatory? So in the case of the EU, the US, and China, there are a lot of regulations that are being rolled out, mainly for this battery raw materials market going into the energy transition. So the biggest one on here will be the battery EU, or the EU battery passport, sorry. And essentially what this is any battery, lithium-ion battery that is being sold into the EU to go into an electric vehicle has to have a carbon footprint report on it, which has to be done by only a few standards, of which an ISO compliant life cycle assessment is one of the primary standards that is recommended to go about this. The US have something called the Inflation Reduction Act. The US right now are pumping billions and billions of dollars into having a more sustainable supply chain, of which environmental impacts is very much within this. And so what they're doing is that if you can prove you have a low impact critical raw material, then you are open to gaining some form of subsidy to help you either build this project or expand the project, etc. Now, China definitely follows some fairly different rules from, I guess, the rest of us in the terms of impact reporting and what they actually look at. But because of the EU and the US really driving these sustainable efforts, and with the EU only accepting batteries nowadays that have this carbon footprint report, last year in November, they released something called the Battery ID. This is just a concept at this stage, but it essentially mirrors the EU battery passport. And what it's going to do is it's going to produce carbon footprint reports on all of these lithium-ion batteries that they are producing and then selling into the EU market. Now, a bit about timelines. So this is for the EU battery passport only, and this is only the timeline for batteries going into electric vehicles. There are additional timelines for battery passports being put on light means of transport, industrial batteries for those mining fleets, etc. But for this one, it's just the electric vehicles. And in 2024, where we are right now, the adoption has been put into play, and now companies are very much developing all of these life cycle assessments to declare the carbon footprint of their lithium-ion battery. And on the, I think it's between the 1st and 2nd week of February 2025, so less than a year away nowadays, every single battery that is being sold into the EU market to go into the electric vehicle industry, they will have to declare the carbon footprint. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the only methods to do this is by an ISO compliant life cycle assessment. And the importance of this is that an ISO compliant life cycle assessment climate change methodology does not only look at your scope 1 and 2, it looks at your scope 1, 2, and 3. And in the case of Australia, who's supplying all these critical raw materials such as lithium, nickel, graphite, etc., going into these lithium-ion batteries, these would be classified as a scope 3. Going forward, in 2028, there will be a carbon footprint threshold. So depending on all the data that is currently collected in the next couple of years, if your lithium-ion battery that's being sold into the EU market is going to have an impact over the threshold that is set, there will be some form of consequence. And if it is under, there will also be some form of reward, of which that's where a lot of the green premium market conversations are coming about. Not that anything has happened right now with the green premium, but this is certainly becoming an awful lot more attention, and definitely I think will evolve over the next couple of years. So when is the best time to do a life cycle assessment? You can pretty much do them at any point, but the best time is really when you're in that pre-feasibility, feasibility, detailed engineering design phase, just before you've gone into construction and operation. Because what it's going to tell you, it's going to tell you what your impact is, it's going to tell you where all your hotspots lie. And then when you're setting those really, really important sustainability targets, such as, getting towards as close as net zero as you can, you are going to want to be able to identify what are those drivers that could be more than just your energy, and how you can mitigate those. And if you're already in construction and operation, it's fairly hard to reconstruct your flow sheet, especially if you're dealing with different reagents. And therefore, that stage just before construction is always the best time to actually influence using environmentally informed decision making. So let's go into some case studies. This is an NMC 811 lithium-ion battery produced by Tesla in 2021. And what this figure is showing you, it's showing you the contribution of all of the materials going into producing and also manufacturing the NMC 811 battery cell. And what you can see here is that from 100% of that total climate change impact, nickel, lithium, and graphite, as well as the electricity required to actually assemble the cell, have the largest drivers. And so with the battery passport, you have to incorporate your scope 3, of which your nickel, your lithium, and your graphite very much sit in your scope 3. And you've also got a carbon threshold coming in. The first thing Tesla's going to do is look at how can they mitigate their impact. And so they're going to assess all their supply chains and say, okay, depending on cost and also impact, where's my break even here? And with nickel being the largest contributor in this case, with lithium and graphite closely behind, they're going to be assessing where they can really source these from, which will lower their overall impact overall for this NMC 811. Now, this is for a nickel-based battery cell, but if we then look at a NCA or an LFP, a lithium iron phosphate battery cell, very, very similar stories can also be seen. So for the NCA, nickel, once again, is taking the lead with where the impact sits, but that's also followed by lithium and graphite, which is holding 15% and 21% respectively of that total 100% of that impact. The exact same with an LFP. If you're looking at selling into an LFP battery supply chain, for once, lithium is actually only contributing 2%, but that graphite is contributing 34% of that total environmental impact. So if they want to get below a certain threshold, and with Tesla being Tesla, they always have sustainability targets that they're trying to get to, they're really going to be assessing where they can source lower impact materials from. So let's actually go into the raw materials themselves. So what this is showing you is a nickel sulfate hexahydrate impact. And keep in mind, this is looking at the nickel contained in nickel sulfate hexahydrate. So a nickel sulfate hexahydrate is what is going to go into your cathode of the majority of your lithium-ion battery cells. And this is looking at the nickel content in that nickel sulfate product. We have 3 different processes producing the exact same product, and you can see that the impact ranges very significantly. Right now, Indonesia is certainly storming the supply chain, but the impact of reducing this nickel sits at about 97.9 kilograms of nickel in nickel sulfate hexahydrate. So if I was Tesla and I was looking at my sustainability targets and I was getting my impact, I was getting my nickel from Indonesia, they would seriously be considering where they can get their alternative supply chains from at this moment in time. The same story can go to lithium. So what we're looking at here is the lithium hydroxide. Once again, goes straight into the cathode of a lithium-ion battery cell. And we've got the exact same product, 3 different processes. We've got Chilean brine, Argentinian brine, and we've got Australian spodumene. And the impacts range from 5 to 16 plus kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of product. And the exact same again for the graphite. So you can see here there's been a very similar story that very much depending on your location, your grade, your energy sources, and the actual process you're going to apply to extract these materials, your impact can range significantly. And so that's when we're going back to our environmentally led decision making, doing this style of work, which is then also seen by the downstream OEMs, and assessing before you've actually started construction where your impact really sits and what your hotspots really are, so you can really make sure that we're producing the most sustainable raw materials that we can, but then are also still delivering all the specifications and the costs, etc., that also come into play here. So this is something that Pilbara did with Calix, and I think this is a really nice example of showing how you can utilize life cycle assessment and to really make a difference in making your supply chain more sustainable, in the sense of they looked at what their baseline would be to produce their lithium hydroxide monohydrate using the coal-fired rotary kiln calcination. And then they also looked at utilizing a technology developed by Calix who looked at using electric calcination, and there was up to an 80% reduction in the emissions of the calcination stage compared to when you're using coal-fired, purely just from this. And these are really game-changing technologies that are coming out that can help with becoming a more sustainable supply chain. Now, let's linking it back to circular economy, because they were all very much about raw materials, literally going from the mine to product. But then once your battery's died, pretty much, you then either send it to disposal or you want to recycle it. There are some really cool technologies coming out nowadays which are becoming a lot more sophisticated to actually recycle batteries and get an efficient amount of recovery from it. So what Primobius are doing, which is a part of Near Metals, is that they've looked at a hydrometallurgical recycling process to see how much of the impact they can reduce compared to producing primary raw material metal production. And as you can see here, there's been around an 85% impact reduction from creating the nickel, cobalt, and lithium metals compared to doing the primary raw material extraction, which is fairly significant, especially when you're looking at not only are they saving impacts from disposal of these products going straight into waste/land, but they're also saving in the terms of emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, I'd say. But that does not mean that all recycling is going to be more efficient or have a lower impact. So in this case, we did some internal work looking at recycling of rare earths, something that has not been achieved in an operational scale so far, but still the results are very interesting. So I think the main takeaway message here is that what you're looking at is just because you can recycle something does not mean that you're automatically going to have a lower environmental impact or you're going to have a lower carbon footprint compared to the fact that you're not disposing of that material anymore. So what this figure has shown you is that you can produce neodymium oxide by 3 different methods: a recycling of a permanent magnet, production of neodymium oxide from a rare earth oxide concentrate, and then also from a rare earth carbonate concentrate. The rare earth carbonate concentrate definitely has the highest impact, but then you'll see that the actual impact of recycling a magnet has a higher impact than if you were to actually produce the equivalent product from extracting and producing a rare earth oxide, which is then converted to a neodymium oxide from primary raw material extraction. So finally, to summarize, life cycle assessments are a great way of quantifying the impact of a product or a process on a global scale. And the demand for this sort of analysis is very much being driven by downstream regulations that are being led by the EU and the US. And it can be very much used to quantify the impact of recycling critical raw materials that contribute to the circular economy. Now, depending on the process selected, as we've seen, it does not mean that recycling is always going to have a lower carbon footprint. And it also does not mean that all of the primary raw material production processes that are out right now are also going to have a lower carbon footprint. The one thing, so I did focus mainly on climate change in this presentation, but one message that I do definitely want people to go away with is the fact of environmental burden shifting. Yes, we can recycle, which is fantastic, and it does, result in lower waste, but that does not always equate to the fact that it will have a lower carbon footprint or a lower footprint of another impact category. The exact same with looking at things like renewable energy, absolutely fantastic for reducing your carbon footprint, but that does not equate to having a lower impact in, let's say, water. So yes, we can always make environmental impact savings, but there will, at most of the time, be some form of environmental burden shift to another impact category. So it's not always a win-win, but at least we are improving going forward. Yeah,
thank you so much, Phoebe, for such a nuanced look at the situation. We have reached a Q&A section of this webinar. So I know there was a lot of chatter in the comments, so it'd be great to unpack some of those questions. I will pass over to Mark to run this part of the webinar. I have to duck off. I'm so sorry. I wish I could stay because I have so many questions, but I will hand the honour across to Mark. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Janelle, and thanks very much to the presenters. Great to get that combination of kicking off with sort of circular economy and the examples of ore sands, and then moving on to ESG and actually reporting and industry examples with the social voices. So in the webinar chat, I see there's been quite a few replies and quite detailed replies to some of the questions. One of the ones that hasn't yet been replied was a quick question from Chamari for Phoebe, which was just, if it's okay to say, what software are you using for life cycle analysis?
Good question. Actually don't use software. We mainly use spreadsheet-based models, and then a combination of internal data that we've built up over time and eCanban.
Right, Chamari giving you a nod there. Just maybe a little statement to prompt any more queries, but it was interesting at a mine waste symposium earlier this year, one of the keynotes made a statement, and they said, if we consider that in nature there is no waste, and we use that as a premise for our planning, and what does that mean to the way we think about, how we operate as as operators in any industry, if in nature there's no waste, which I thought was really interesting. Yeah, sorry, Evan, you got one? No.
Sorry for that. Yep, all good, Mark.
No problem. Phoebe, I did have working from the from the last speaker backwards, but just asking, you were talking about the importance of building in the environmental assessment and consideration into the early studies, pre-operation. What kind of accuracy is put on some of the assumptions that go into the pre-feasibility and feasibility study? We have cost estimates with particular accuracy levels which reflect the accuracy of the outcome, and we see a lot of the numbers reported as a specific number, but there must be a confidence limit on those, right?
100%. So within the ISO standard, you have to have an uncertainty. Even when you're in operation, there's still a bit of an uncertainty with the data. So when you're in that pre-feasibility / feasibility stage, your uncertainty level very much ranges between around 20 to 25%, with a scoping study being around 30%. And then in the actual impact models you generate, we definitely run uncertainty analysis to actually understand what would be the range of impact taken into account the uncertainty percentage assigned to the data. And then driving even further and doing sensitivity analysis. So if you've got 5 in particular big hotspots or very large assumptions, then you would also be highlighting, okay, if I'm going to assume that I can get 100% renewable power, if I don't get that and I have to use the power source available in the area, what is going to happen to my impact and how much is that going to be increased or decreased by?
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, those sound like similar numbers to those that people put on cost accuracy for those levels of studies, right? Yeah, good. And presenters, you're welcome to ask questions of other presenters as well. So there's 2 options. The presenters can actually, ask their questions live. For those of you who dialed in, please use the Q&A and or the chat function. Yeah, well, it's good. I think, as we say, we had some good questions coming up with feedback into the chat, so that's pretty good. I am conscious that we did plan to wrap up this at 25 minutes past, which is now, albeit we started the Q&A session a bit later. So,
Mark, it's Evan here. I've got a quick question for Kieren, if Kieren's still on the line. Really fascinating talk, Kieren. Thank you very much. I guess my question is about, the approach that you've used with the social license and the examples with I guess some of the larger companies. Have you done any work with, I guess, smaller, more niche cultural communities where perhaps the appetite may not be as accepting, I suppose, of that survey approach? Do you have any examples you can share on that front?
Yeah, sure. Yes, absolutely. So I think one of the key, I guess, value points in our work is that we operate at arm's length from the companies. So of course they're paying the bill. We're working with them on developing the instruments and whatever else. But how we do the work, how we collect the data, the ethical considerations we have in place around anonymity, confidentiality, not sharing anything back with the company that might identify somebody, helps to build this atmosphere of safety around the process. And what we find is that even in most of those places where people are quite cynical or have some real concern around a project or a company, that they feel comfortable to participate in that based on those assurances. So we see that, and then in terms of scale, we also operate with exploration companies, single site exploration companies, right through to the multinationals, and from kind of larger communities through to really small communities that are important for their voices to be heard. So, for example, Pilbara pastoralists, but also then, of course, First Nations people and all sorts of different groups that might get washed out in a larger survey. So we'll build processes that help them to feel comfortable and to have voice in a way that is appropriate to them in their context.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Kieren. And Kieren, Helen's popped a question into the Q&A. She asks, what are you seeing as the appetite from commercial banks for supporting SLLs?
Yeah, really strong. So that one that we were working on very recently, there were the very largest banks in the world involved in that. And so I think that they're very conscious of being exposed in the space and looking to manage their risks in new and novel ways. And in engaging with them, they were incredibly serious. I think the first interaction was an email from the lead lending bank there with 40 questions in it about 10 minutes before we're going to meet. So, and very sharp, very quick to pick up on methodology and to ask very good questions. I think that they're a great audience for this kind of work, actually. And, the next 12 months, I think, could be important for doubling down on that and supporting that enthusiasm. And I think that's the role of groups like ours, is to make it easy. So give them really good data, defensible, robust data, good process and reporting to be able to take that to their stakeholders and make this a really legitimate component of the ESG framework.
Yeah, thanks, Kieren. Chamari, I've got a question which may or may not be fair. So not asking you to necessarily comment on your experience with the Queensland government, but just in general, you discussed your review with industry in terms of maturity and looking at the maturity of their processes and approach. In your research, what is your sense of, if you like, government and state government maturity across Australia or those countries that you're benchmarking against? Is there a country that you would say this is, at 10 out of 10, and in which case, what's the relative maturity of some of the other countries, including states within our own country?
So what did you mean, like how the maturity compared to Queensland and other countries?
Sure.
Yeah, so there are some countries like Netherlands or France, they have a very high maturity level in implementing circularity. So as part of this project, I had a conversation with circular economy experts in Netherlands. They have a very clear vision for circular economy statewide, and they have very clear action plans. They are in the implementation stage. So compared to those territories, so we have very low maturity level in terms of circular economy, because I did a kind of analysis of the circular economy initiatives of the government, Queensland, all states of Queensland as well. So those strategies are also more focused on waste strategies, especially Queensland. It's more about like waste management, not more circular, but some states have kind of circular related roadmaps and strategies, but still we are very low maturity level compared to other, especially European regions like Netherlands, France, countries like that.
Good. Be good to ask the question again in 1 year, 2 year, and 3 years' time.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Evan, I'm not sure if you've got any housekeeping you want to share, but I'm conscious that we're now 5 minutes over our planned stop time. So I'm recommending we call it to a close and do a final thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Just one little bit of housekeeping, as Janelle mentioned at the top of the webinar. Our next webinar is in 4 weeks' time on the Wednesday, the 24th of April, and that's being led by Vladimir Lisitsyn from the survey, looking at deposit characterization. So look out for that one. Thank you for being a part of this afternoon's discussion, to everyone who joined us online. And thank you again to all the presenters for making themselves available to give a talk. It's been a really fascinating afternoon listening, and thank you for being part of it. And we hope you can join us again soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.